This is a mistake. Captain Daniel Reyes thought he was making the arrest of his career. Anonymous tip. Suspicious man in a flight suit found in the Arizona desert. Possible enemy combatant. Possible foreign military pilot. In his mind, detaining the individual was routine and compliance was expected. He had stopped dozens of people based on nothing more than how they looked or where they were found. Never questioned, never challenged. But when he approached Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb on a scorching Tuesday afternoon in the Sonoran Desert and demanded papers from the man in the orange-striped survival vest, he made a catastrophic miscalculation. LT Colonel Marcus Webb, a decorated F-35 fighter pilot with 18 years of active service, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, knew exactly what was happening. And when he refused the unlawful detention, citing his Geneva Convention protections as an active-duty military officer on American soil, Captain Reyes made a series of decisions that would cost Pima County $12.7 million. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Reyes had been with the Pima County Sheriff's Department for 9 years, working the Southern Desert Corridor with a reputation for aggressive field enforcement. He had been named in 4 civilian complaints, each alleging excessive force and constitutional violations, but none had resulted in meaningful discipline. His supervisors praised his proactive approach, his willingness to make stops that other deputies might hesitate on. In reality, Reyes operated on the assumption that his badge gave him authority to detain anyone he deemed suspicious, that constitutional protections didn't apply when he had a gut feeling. He had stopped dozens of people in remote areas, demanding papers, conducting searches, making arrests based on appearance alone. And until that Tuesday afternoon, no one had challenged him on constitutional or military legal grounds. The call had come in at 1:17 p.m. Anonymous complaint about a man in a military flight suit wandering near Highway 86, west of Tucson. The caller claimed the man appeared disoriented, possibly foreign, possibly a threat to national security. No specifics, no evidence, just vague accusations that should have been cross-referenced with military authorities before any action was taken. But Reyes didn't wait. He grabbed his partner, Deputy Sandra Flores, and headed to the coordinates. Both officers activated their body cameras as they pulled onto the desert shoulder at 1:44 p.m., the Arizona sun blazing directly overhead, casting almost no shadow on the cracked earth, providing perfect visibility for the cameras. The Sonoran Desert stretched endlessly in every direction, towering saguaro cacti standing like silent witnesses in the midday heat. The temperature gauge on the patrol vehicle read 109 degrees. In the distance, a column of dark smoke rose from behind a ridge, the kind of smoke that comes from burning aviation fuel and composite materials. A military parachute, partially deflated, lay tangled in a cluster of Palo Verde trees 50 yards off the road. LT. Colonel Marcus Webb stood beside the parachute, his orange-striped survival vest clearly identifying him as an ejected military aviator. His name tape and rank insignia visible on his olive flight suit. He was speaking into a military-issue survival radio, his voice calm and professional, actively communicating his coordinates to someone on the other end. Reyes's body camera captured his approach across the rocky terrain. Flores's camera provided a wide angle, recording the scene, the parachute in the trees, the smoke rising in the distance. The man in the distinctive survival gear that any law enforcement officer with basic military familiarization training would immediately recognize. Reyes walked directly toward Webb, his hand resting on his sidearm, his posture radiating authority and suspicion. The afternoon sun created perfect visibility, every detail captured in sharp clarity. "Hey," Reyes called out, his voice carrying across the desert landscape and interrupting Webb's radio communication. "Don't move. I need to speak with you." He pointed directly at Webb, the gesture captured on both cameras. Webb held up one finger, finished his radio transmission, confirmed his GPS coordinates with what was clearly a military operations center on the other end, then lowered the device and turned to face Reyes. Flores's camera captured his expression. Composed, professional, a man in his mid-40s with a close-cropped military fade. Wearing the full flight suit and survival vest that clearly identified his role and status. Deputy, I'm LT. Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Air Force, tail number November Foxtrot 35 Alpha. I've already communicated my position to Davis Monthan Operations. A recovery team is approximately 20 minutes out. How can I help you? Reyes stepped closer. His camera recording the approach, Webb's name tape, rank insignia, and unit patch clearly visible on the flight suit. I need to see your identification and documentation proving you're authorized to be in this area and that you are who you claim to be. The demand hung in the desert air. Captured on both body cameras with crystal-clear audio. Flores shifted her weight behind Reyes, her camera recording her own subtle discomfort at the situation. Webb's expression shifted from cooperative efficiency to a slow, careful recognition of what was unfolding. I'm sorry, come again? Your identification and authorization papers, Reyes repeated, his tone suggesting this was a routine request. His voice carrying the assumption that compliance was mandatory. We've received a report about a suspicious individual in this area. I need to verify who you are and why you're here. Webb's hands remained visible at his sides, his survival training keeping him calm even as he processed the nature of the confrontation. Both cameras captured his measured response, voice steady. Deputy, I'm an active duty Air Force LT, Colonel. My identification is in my survival vest. But before we go further, I want to make sure you understand what you're looking at. My aircraft, an F-35C, experienced a catastrophic systems failure at approximately 1:04 p.m. today. I ejected at altitude over the Tohono O'odham Reservation. My survival radio has already confirmed contact with Davis Monthan Air Base. A military recovery helicopter is inbound. The aircraft wreckage is behind that ridge. That doesn't verify your identity, Reyes said dismissively. His camera recording his own hand gesturing toward the distant smoke as though it were irrelevant. I need to see government-issued identification right now, and I need you to explain why you were in that aircraft. The desert heat shimmered off the ground between them. Webb's jaw tightened, his voice remaining controlled but taking on the distinct authority of a senior military officer. Deputy, I am not required to explain my mission parameters to a county law enforcement officer. That information is above your clearance level. What I can tell you is that I am an active-duty United States military officer on American soil, following a combat training exercise emergency. My status is protected under both military law and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You do not have jurisdiction over active-duty military personnel in the performance of their duties. Reyes's face flushed slightly, the color change visible on Flores's camera from the side. The bright desert sun making every nuance unmistakable. Sir, I don't know what you claim to be. All I know is I received a call about a suspicious individual, and until I verify your identity, you are a person of interest. If you have nothing to hide, showing me your papers shouldn't be a problem. Papers, Webb repeated, the word carrying a particular weight. Deputy, I've been flying combat missions for the United States military for 18 years. I've done 2 tours over Afghanistan, 1 over Syria, and 4 classified operations I can't discuss in an open field. I have never, in 18 years of service to this country, been asked to show papers in the middle of an emergency ejection sequence. He paused, his voice steady. The Fourth Amendment protects American citizens from unreasonable seizures. Detaining an active-duty military officer without probable cause of a crime also violates the Posse Comitatus Act, which specifically restricts civilian law enforcement from exercising authority over military personnel. Unless you can articulate a specific federal crime you believe I have committed, you have no legal authority to detain me. Flores shifted uncomfortably behind Reyes, her camera wavering slightly, recording her own boots shuffling on the desert floor. She had done her military familiarization training. She recognized a standard Air Force survival vest from the photographs in the manual. She could read the name tape and rank insignia from where she was standing. The ejection handle visible on the seat pan dragged to the parachute, the survival radio, the oxygen mask clipped to the vest. All of it told the same story that was completely consistent with a military aviator who had just survived an ejection. But she remained silent, unwilling to contradict her partner in the field, unwilling to challenge the implicit momentum of the stop once it had begun. Should law enforcement be permitted to detain active duty military officers without any probable cause? Comment below. This wasn't just about one pilot. This was about whether civilian jurisdiction ends where military authority begins, and whether the uniform of the United States Armed Forces means anything when the wrong person is wearing it. Reyes crossed his arms, his camera recording his own posture as he squared up. I understand you believe you're military, but I can't verify that in the field. You could be wearing that uniform for any number of reasons. Until I can confirm your identity and status, you are being detained for questioning. You can cooperate and show me your ID, or we can do this the hard way. The hard way, Webb's voice rose slightly, his military bearing the only thing keeping the full weight of his outrage contained. Deputy, what you are doing right now is a violation of federal law. You walked out into this desert and immediately decided that a man in a full Air Force flight suit, standing next to a military parachute, actively communicating with a military airbase on a military survival radio, is somehow suspicious. What exactly triggered your suspicion? Because from where I'm standing, the only variable that doesn't fit your image of what a United States Air Force LT colonel should look like is the color of my skin. The body camera footage captured every word with devastating clarity in the desert silence. No ambient noise, no traffic. Just the distant sound of a military helicopter, still 15 minutes out, and two men standing in the heat of the Sonoran Desert having a conversation that would eventually be watched by millions. Reyes straightened, his posture hardening. Final warning. You will submit to identification verification or you will be detained. Detained for what crime? Webb demanded, his voice now carrying the full authority of his rank. Operating a military aircraft, surviving an ejection, standing in the Arizona desert in my own country's uniform. Name the crime, deputy. Because if you cannot name a crime, you have no legal basis to detain me. And everything you do from this point forward is a federal civil rights violation. Reyes's face went dark red in the afternoon sun, the color captured clearly on Flores's camera. He had been challenged before, but never like this. Never by someone with this level of legal and institutional authority standing behind them. Never by someone who refused to be moved. You're obstructing a law enforcement investigation, he said. Obstructing what investigation? Webb fired back. There is no investigation. There's an anonymous complaint with no specifics, which doesn't create probable cause or reasonable suspicion under Terry v. Ohio. You are in posse comitatus violation territory right now, deputy. I strongly recommend you step back, contact your supervisor, and wait for the military recovery team that is currently 12 minutes from this location. Because every second of this conversation is being recorded on your body camera, my survival vest camera, and the automatic crash data recorder from my aircraft, which has already transmitted this location to Air Force Legal Command. Reyes moved toward Webb, reaching for his handcuff pouch. His intention unmistakable. Both body cameras captured the movement in real time. I'm placing you under detention pending identity verification. You absolutely will not, Webb said, his posture not shifting an inch. I am not resisting, I am not obstructing, I am an active duty LT. Colonel of the United States Air Force, standing on American soil, invoking every protection afforded to me by the Constitution, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. If you put handcuffs on me, you will be committing a federal crime. Reyes grabbed Webb's arm. Flores's camera captured Webb's hands remaining deliberately, carefully at his sides, no resistance, no physical reaction. Just a man standing with absolute stillness while something profoundly wrong happened to him in the middle of the desert. He had spent 18 years flying over and protecting. You are being detained for failure to comply with a lawful order and obstruction of a law enforcement investigation, Reyes said, pulling Webb's arms behind his back. This is being recorded, Webb said, his voice controlled even in the moment of the handcuffs closing. My name is LT, Colonel Marcus James Webb, United States Air Force, service number 490-270-688-14. Today is Tuesday. The time is approximately 1:52 p.m. I have been placed in handcuffs by Pima County Sheriff's Deputy Captain Daniel Reyes, following my emergency ejection from Air Force aircraft November Foxtrot 35 Alpha. I have committed no crime. I have violated no law. I have done nothing except survive an ejection and stand in the desert while a recovery team was inbound. This is what happens when a black man in America can be wearing the uniform of the United States military and still be treated as a threat rather than a soldier. Flores's camera recorded her own. Stillness. Her feet not moving, her hands at her sides, she had said nothing, done nothing, let it happen. Reyes walked Webb toward the patrol vehicle, his camera recording the path across the rocky desert floor, past the deployed parachute, past the survival equipment laid out in standard ejection sequence. Flores's camera captured the scene from behind. Webb in handcuffs, his Air Force flight suit pristine except for the dust from the desert floor, his name tape and rank insignia still clearly visible. Being detained in the middle of the country, he had served for nearly 2 decades. They reached the patrol vehicle at 1:58 p.m. The distant sound of rotors was now clearly audible. A military recovery helicopter visible as a small shape against the blue Arizona sky, growing larger. That's my recovery team, Webb said. Reyes put him in the back of the patrol car anyway. Webb sat in the rear seat, sweat beginning to build under the flight suit in the inadequately cooled vehicle, and looked directly into the body camera mounted on the cage separating front from back. My name is LT, Colonel Marcus James Webb. I'm a United States Air Force fighter pilot with 18 years of active service. I ejected from my aircraft at approximately 1:04 p.m. today following a catastrophic systems failure during a combat training exercise. I was in active radio contact with Davis-Monthan Air Base when Deputy Reyes approached me. I identified myself clearly and completely. I cited the applicable law. I did everything correctly. And I was handcuffed in the desert anyway, in front of an inbound military recovery helicopter, by a county deputy who looked at an Air Force pilot in full flight gear and decided I was a threat. My survival vest camera recorded everything. My aircraft's black box transmitted everything. Davis-Monthan operations recorded my radio traffic. The truth is documented from 17 different sources, and every one of them will be entered into evidence. Outside the patrol car, the military recovery helicopter was landing 30 yards away. Rotors kicking up a massive dust cloud across the desert. 3 Air Force personnel jumped out before the rotors had fully stopped. The recovery team leader, a JAG Corps officer, and a senior master sergeant. The JAG officer walked directly to Flores, who was standing outside the patrol car and held up credentials. I'm Major Patricia Cole, Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps. Where is LT? Colonel Webb, Flores pointed silently at the back of the patrol car. Major Cole looked through the window at Webb in handcuffs, then turned back to Flores. Her expression, captured on Flores's body camera, was one of controlled disbelief. You handcuffed an active duty LT. Colonel in the middle of his own emergency ejection recovery? Flores said nothing. Major Cole knocked on the window. Webb nodded at her, calm, composed, already in full documentation mode. Get him out of there, she said. At the county facility, Reyes processed Webb for obstruction and failure to comply with a lawful order. The booking officer's reaction when Reyes explained the arrest was captured completely on the body camera. The long silence, the slow blinking. You detained an Air Force LT. Colonel in a flight suit with a parachute next to a downed aircraft, while a recovery helicopter was inbound. Because you couldn't verify his identity. The booking officer's voice was absolutely flat. He was uncooperative, Reyes said, another silence. His JAG officer is in the lobby, the booking officer said. She's been here for 11 minutes. She has his service record, his security clearance documentation, his flight logs. And what I'm told is a very detailed memo from the base commander addressed directly to the county sheriff. Reyes said nothing. Process him anyway, he said quietly. Webb was held for 4 hours before Major Cole secured his release. The charges, obstruction and failure to comply, were dropped within 72 hours. The county prosecutor reviewed the body camera footage, the survival vest camera footage, the Air Force radio transcripts, the JAG documentation, and the black box transmission records, and declined to pursue the case in under an hour of review. In her dismissal memo, she wrote that the detainee had correctly and repeatedly identified himself as an active duty military officer, that the deputy had no reasonable suspicion of any criminal activity, that the detention violated both Fourth Amendment protections and raised serious posse comitatus concerns, and that the detainee had been fully compliant throughout, while clearly and accurately citing applicable law. All charges were dismissed and the matter was referred for civil rights review, but dismissal was not close to enough. 6 days after his release, Lt. Colonel Webb walked into the offices of the ACLU of Arizona alongside his personal attorney and a JAG representative. The civil rights attorney who took his case, a woman named Christine Acaffer with 23 years of experience in both military and civil rights law, watched the body camera footage and the survival vest recording back to back without saying a single word. When it finished, she looked at Webb directly. Deputy Reyes saw an Air Force pilot in a full flight suit standing next to a deployed military parachute with a military helicopter inbound, and decided you were suspicious. And the only explanation that fits every fact in this recording is that he saw a black man first and a pilot second. Webb nodded. That's exactly right. Then we are going to make sure that costs someone something significant, Acaffer said, already reaching for her legal pad. The federal civil rights lawsuit was filed in the United States District Court for the District of Arizona, Lt. Colonel Marcus James Webb versus Pima County, Deputy Captain Daniel Reyes, and Deputy Sandra Flores. The complaint alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, unlawful seizure, false arrest, malicious prosecution, violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, retaliation for asserting constitutional and military legal rights, selective enforcement based on race, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The county's initial offer was $40,000. Acaffer declined without a counteroffer. "We'll see you in court," she said. The case went to trial 19 months later. The courtroom was filled every day with military veterans, civil rights advocates, members of Tucson's black community, active duty service members in uniform who came on their own time, and national media covering what had been framed as a defining case about whether the uniform of the United States military provides protection or whether race overrides everything. The body camera footage and survival vest camera recordings were played simultaneously on the opening day of trial on a split screen, giving the jury two simultaneous perspectives of the same encounter in the desert. The jury watched Reyes approach a man in full Air Force flight gear, standing next to a deployed parachute with a military aircraft burning in the background, and demand papers. They watched Webb calmly and precisely identify himself, cite the applicable law, explain his situation in clear detail, and maintain complete composure through an encounter that would have broken most people. They watched Flores say nothing. They watched the military recovery helicopter landing in the background while Webb sat in handcuffs in the back of a county patrol car. They watched Major Cole's expression when she looked through the patrol car window. When the footage ended, 4 jurors were visibly emotional. The others sat with the particular stillness of people who have just seen something they cannot unsee. Webb testified for 6 hours over 2 days. He described 18 years of service, 2 combat deployments, 4 classified operations, hundreds of flight hours over hostile territory. He described what it felt like to survive an ejection, to make successful contact with his base, to be in the middle of a standard recovery sequence, and then to watch a county patrol vehicle pull up and realize that none of it, not the uniform, not the rank, not the radio, not the parachute, not the burning aircraft visible on the horizon, was going to matter to the man walking toward him. "I have flown combat missions for this country," he told the jury, voice steady and precise. "I have been shot at over 3 different continents in defense of the Constitution of the United States. I know what that document says because I swore an oath to it when I was 22 years old, and I have renewed that oath every day since. The Fourth Amendment does not have an asterisk. The protection against unreasonable seizure does not have an exception for how you look. Deputy Reyes looked at me and saw a suspect, not a pilot, not an officer, not 18 years of service. A suspect, and that tells you everything you need to know about why we're here. The expert witnesses were devastating to the defense. A retired Air Force general testified that any law enforcement officer with standard military familiarization training would have immediately recognized Webb's survival vest, name tape, rank insignia, and ejection recovery equipment. A constitutional law professor from the University of Arizona testified that the stop violated the Fourth Amendment under any reasonable interpretation of Terry v. Ohio. A posse comitatus specialist testified that the detention of an active duty military officer in the performance of their duties by a civilian law enforcement agency raised serious federal statutory violations. The defense argued qualified immunity. Acaffer dismantled it in her closing argument with 11 minutes of body camera footage played on a loop. "Ladies and gentlemen," she told the jury, LT. Colonel Webb told Deputy Reyes exactly who he was. He showed him the uniform. He cited the law. He explained the situation in terms a first-year criminal justice student would understand. And then a military recovery helicopter landed 30 yards away, confirming every single thing he had said. And Reyes put him in handcuffs anyway. That is not a reasonable mistake. That is willful blindness. That is exactly what qualified immunity does not protect. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Webb spent it surrounded by fellow aviators who had flown in from bases across the country, by family from Atlanta, by veterans organizations who had filed amicus briefs in support of his case. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom filled in under 3 minutes. Liable on all counts, the room erupted. Webb stood straight, jaw tight, eyes bright, the posture of a man who had spent 18 years learning to hold himself together under pressure, holding together one more time. The damages phase lasted 10 days. The jury heard about Webb's grounding during the investigation, the security clearance review triggered by the arrest, the months of administrative proceedings that followed, the impact on his promotion timeline, and the psychological toll of being treated as an enemy combatant on his own country's soil. They heard from fellow pilots who described the particular damage done to a military aviator when their country's uniform fails to protect them. They heard from a military career specialist who calculated the full impact on Webb's service trajectory. They heard from a trauma specialist about the specific injury caused when a person's institutional identity, their rank, their service, their sacrifice is rendered invisible by racial bias. When the jury announced the damages, the courtroom went silent for a full 3 seconds before it erupted. $7.2 million in compensatory damages for lost career advancement, emotional distress, reputational harm, and violation of constitutional and military legal rights. $5.5 million in punitive damages calculated to send an unmistakable message to every law enforcement agency in the state about detaining military personnel without cause. Total, $12.7 million. The largest civil rights verdict involving active duty military personnel in Arizona history. Reyes was terminated within 24 hours. Flores received a formal reprimand and a 12-month probationary period. Pima County, under joint pressure from the Department of Justice and the Department of the Air Force, announced comprehensive reforms. Mandatory military law and posse comitatus training for all deputies. New protocols requiring immediate contact with base operations when military personnel are encountered in the field. Body camera review requirements for all detentions involving constitutional challenges, and an independent oversight panel specifically for incidents involving active duty military. The Department of the Air Force issued a formal directive updating procedures for pilots to document law enforcement contact during emergency recovery situations, a procedure that had never previously been necessary. Webb used a portion of his settlement to establish the Uniform and Constitution Fund. Providing legal resources to active duty, and veteran service members subjected to unlawful law enforcement contact. He testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. He spoke at military academies and law schools. He flew his final deployment 6 months after the verdict, cleared by the Air Force Medical Board, reinstated to full flight status. His record noting the legal victory, alongside 18 years of distinguished service. The body camera footage, the survival vest recording, and the audio of the military recovery helicopter landing, while Webb sat in handcuffs, became required training material at law enforcement academies and military bases alike. A case study in what happens when racial bias is allowed to override law. Rank and the uniform of the United States Armed Forces. And in Tucson, LT. Colonel Marcus Webb's case became a landmark, proof that the Constitution means something, that the uniform means something. That racial profiling has consequences regardless of who you are or what you've sacrificed, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can say to unjust authority is simply, "I know the law. I know my rights and I am not moving." If you believe that serving this country in uniform should mean something, that the Fourth Amendment protects all Americans regardless of race, and that standing your ground against an unlawful order takes more courage than any combat mission, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tomorrow we have another story of truth prevailing against the odds. Because the record, captured on body cameras, survival vests, radio transcripts, and black boxes, reminds us that this country belongs to the people who defend it, not to those who would decide on sight who among them deserves its protection.